Welcome to the show Gold Squadron Gays. It's the podcast where two Star Wars loving gays talk about and review their favorite Star Wars content while also being gay as hell. I'm your host, Bradley Brower.
I'm your other host, Charles Rogers, and today we have another guest. I don't know if you guys have figured it out. This is guests all the way down, through Skeleton Crew, because we got fucking sick of listening to each other talk.
That's right.
Speaking of people I listen to talk weekly, guest, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Loreley Weissel-Labrizzi. I am normally not on this podcast. I co-host another show called the Vorthos Cast. We talk about the stories and lore and art and whatnot of Magic the Gathering, doing a lot of story summaries, author interviews, talking about art on the cards, flavor gems, all kinds of stuff.
Now, I'm a pretty relentless listener of the Vorthos Cast because I'm not that able to follow Magic story well, and a lot of my friends are. Like, they're into Magic to the degree that I'm into Star Wars, which is they've read everything for the past 30 years, and I haven't. And I am very grateful to the Vorthos Cast for two reasons. Number one, it keeps me like up to date on the current Magic lore, so that when my boyfriend asks me like, did you know that they just did this thing with a haunted house? And I'm like, yes, honey, I listened to the Vorthos Cast. I know all about that. The other thing is I call it my Stay Humble podcast, because it reminds me that even if I'm into a thing, I don't know everything about the thing. And I find that Vorthos Cast is also really accessible.
I'm really happy to hear both of those things. A big part of what we try to do is make Magic Story a little more accessible. And, you know, especially for the story summaries, is like, hey, if you're not reading the story, we still want you to be able to know what happens. And so we kind of break that down and like, let people know why things are important, because sometimes we'll have plot points like a character will use a sword that hasn't been in a story for 20 years and nobody knows why that's important, and then we tell you why.
I love the flavor gems episodes, just because I have to look at some of these decks. My boyfriend is like a Magic player, like builds multiple commander decks, spends way too much of his disposable income on it. And I'm like, look, I'm just happy you have a hobby and are leaving the house. But it is nice with the flavor gems to be able to look at a card and be like, oh, I know that that's a Magic in-joke from 30 years ago.
Yeah, one of the great things about IPs with like decades and decades and decades of history, you might know some others,
just one or two,
is that like the sheer depth of lore to pull from. I mean, literally, Star Wars is the fandom that got the term glup shitto like added to like fandom jargon for those kinds of references, and a lot of people miss them. But I think there are a lot of ways where they can really add texture and affection, I think is the word I'm going to use, to a world or to a story where like, especially if it's something that isn't, like super important, but is like a little Easter egg in like the 90s video game term Easter egg, and not the way YouTubers use it to talk about like basic plot points of movies these days.
Yeah, and we actually covered like last week, we had a guest on that was really, really knowledgeable in Legends, like even more so than I am. And she was able to point out like multiple times that they were calling back to storytelling from like 20 years ago, and you never would have noticed it in Skeleton Crew. We're talking about Skeleton Crew, by the way. Multiple times it would call back to this storyline and you just wouldn't know it, because Skeleton Crew at least is so subtle about playing with a lot of the same themes that have been part of Star Wars history. And I feel like listening to the Vorthos Cast, Magic the Gathering is doing kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
Especially with their recent set. Not to derail this too much for Bradley, who's giving me blank looks in the video call because this is way out of his depth.
I was like, we're talking about a card game, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
just trying to keep on track.
That's the simple way of explaining it.
Gotcha.
That's that's like saying Star Wars is some movies,
which would technically be correct.
They made Star Wars movies?
They did.
Right, yeah.
They made a couple of movies. One thing that they're doing recently is I've noticed they keep going back to planes that they haven't gone back to in a really long time.
So the most recent set, Ether Drift, that just came out like yesterday. Ether Drift is a multiplanar death race with a bunch of different teams from a bunch of different worlds all competing together. It's very sweet. One of the teams is from a world called Gastal, which was very briefly mentioned in the novel Planeswalker like 25 years ago. And we knew almost nothing about it. And then this is the first time we've like ever actually seen people from there. That's not true. Akul and Thunder Junction last year is from Gastal, but this is the first time we're seeing anything about
I
like,
have
and learning
many
anything.
thoughts on Thunder Junction. Many.
Yeah, a lot of people do. There's all I'm going to say about that because that's a whole other podcast topic. But yeah, so like Gastal is a world from like 25 years ago that we're only just starting to like actually develop details about. It's kind of a Mad Max post-apocalypse, gasoline is more plentiful than water type world, which is rad as hell, especially in a death race set because you have your George Miller racing mooks covered in iron and spikes, not wearing shirts, blowing each other up, and it's fun.
Yeah, I do think that one thing that Magic and Star Wars have in common, I think when they're both doing things well and when they're both handed off to creators that, like the current batch of Magic writers and creatives, is that it's such an open concept that you can really play with, like, what can you actually do in this setting? And I'm thinking with Magic being this sort of multiversal thing that you can have any plane you want. Do you want a plane that's just a haunted house?
Yeah, we got that.
The whole haunted house, we got that. It's Duskmourn. Do you want a plane that's Redwall? We got that. It tricked a lot of people into getting into Magic because they saw cute animals.
Yeah.
And they thought that was what this was. And that is not what this is. Although I have to say, Ral as an otter, A+.
A+.
Whoever came up with that, perfect. But Star Wars kind of does the same thing, and we see it too in Skeleton Crew with people were mad about the Star Wars suburbs, but the Star Wars suburbs make so much sense in context.
I have so many thoughts on Star Wars suburbs. Largely, Star Wars has like, I think it's really the source of we're going to talk about more fandom jargon, Planet of Hats.
Yes.
And so Star Wars is like, I think the origin of this, where you talk about a planet and it only seems to have one biome and one city on it.
It's that or Doctor Who. I don't know whether it was Star Wars or Doctor Who that first coined the idea of the Planet of Hats.
But and then you look across like especially the Star Wars visual media, in terms of just movies and shows. Most of the planets we've been to are like Coruscant or in the Outer Rim, which is like if the only movies they ever made were about Midtown Manhattan or Kansas and nothing else, you would think that America is only like cornfields and Times Square, but it's actually a lot more things. And Star Wars just has this kind of like focal lens issue where we just haven't seen anything like that before because they keep not showing us any of those things because they're these either city planets or remote planet and nothing in between. But there's also there's so many thematic things about Star Wars suburbs that matter for this show and matter for like there's a 1980s Spielberg vibe that Skeleton Crew is really trying to grab.
100%.
Not even try. I think this is maybe getting a little head of topics, but I think Skeleton Crew is the most successful attempt I've seen to capture that feeling. Stranger Things sure did try, and it had a little bit, but Skeleton Crew legitimately just feels like 80s Spielberg in a lot of ways, and that has its own notions of the suburbs in ways that are explored a little bit here as well.
Yeah, this was something that I really hammered home in our episode 0 and our episode 1 is that like it goes back to those themes. Like themes are maybe for 8th grade book reports, according to the creators of Game of Thrones, but they are also for Star Wars. And they're definitely present here. Like there's a note that I'm going to have later on where there's a sequence in this episode that we're going to talk about that's very The Goonies. It's very like that kids in the haunted pirate cave kind of sequence. And it's like, it's going back to the vibe of what made those movies so resonant in the 80s and 90s when they were coming out. In a way that if you're only looking at the surface level, like you could do a Star Wars plot with kids who discover a pirate ship and go hopping off in the galaxy, which is the plot that I thought the show was going to be when they announced it. And I went, that sounds fucking dumb. I am not excited about this. What I didn't realize was that these creators absolutely understand what made a Spielberg movie so good. They get it.
Yeah, the themes are for eighth grade book reports. Comment is very funny because my degree is in film studies, so I do actually have a lit degree to tie. I spent a lot of money to talk about themes.
I spent a lot of money on a screenwriting degree, and I get to do this podcast. That's what I paid all that money for, apparently, was to meet Bradley and know what act breaks are.
Uh-huh.
Yay!
That's
That
pretty much
was
all we do.
totally worth the money. Alrighty. Bradley, do you want to, before we get on a very long tangent about whether your film degree is actually worth it,
Right.
can you please tell us what we're talking about today?
Today we're talking about Skeleton Crew, Episode 5. You have a lot to learn about pirates. A seemingly pleasant world will test our heroes like no other. Loreley, what is one thing you liked about this episode and one thing you think they could improve on?
One of the I think one problem is I like a lot of things. The thing I'll say is
Welcome to our struggle. There's a reason. Every other show that we cover, we have one thing you liked and one thing you didn't. And we tried that for one episode and went, there's no fucking way.
I will keep it to the moment that happens in the prologue back on Aten, or a planet that is allegedly at Aten, with the parents, because we get to see Wendell and Farah and Neil's mom, whose name I forgot to write down. And so they're enacting their little plan to try and contact their kids. Wendell gets this little like hacking device to get a code that they're not supposed to have access to. And he gets caught by a security droid who's like, and then tries to hide the little gizmo behind his back. And the security droid is like, hey, what's that in your hand? And he slowly reveals one hand and then puts it behind his back and then very obviously transfers the thing to his other hand and then shows his other hand and is like, I don't know what you're talking about. And the security droid's like, come on, show me both of your hands at the same time. And I'm just like, this is such a whim moment. And you can just like, yeah, that's that kid's dad. Now you like know where Wim gets some of his little cheekiness from, because his dad does the same thing. And we get the same moment with Farah immediately afterwards, because in order to cover up their little plot, she shuts down one of the security droids in the same way that Fern was manipulating their droid at home in order to, you know, cover up their little devious plot. And so it's like, but both of these moments we get to see a little bit of the children's behavior in their parents, which I think is really delightful. That just absolute fun thing. And great character moments just right at the start of the episode.
Is there anything you could have improved on in this? I know this is a very challenging question.
And like this episode in particular, I think is tricky because it's sitting as a cliffhanger episode, and as like really important exposition and character moments turns happen in this episode. And like,
you can say no.
Like, it's hard, like, because I wanted one more like scene touching base with the parents in this episode, but I also don't know where you would even put it, which is probably why it's not there. Because I don't know how you would like rearrange the last third of the episode to try and fit another touch base back home, because the last third of the episode really wants to keep the action moving. So a tacit no of what to improve. I think this episode manages its time really well in the way it needs to in that regard.
For me, one thing I really liked in this episode was Jod. Jod's betrayal, if you watch the episode the first time, kind of seems to come out of nowhere. And also, like, obviously he was planning to do this the whole time, but he just sort of picks this moment. If you rewatch this episode with the benefit of hindsight, you can tell as he goes through the episode, he is starting to get at the end of his patience with these fucking kids. Because he tries to explain to them, like, you are in serious danger. I am in serious danger. We have to keep moving. The way he talks to the kids in this episode is so markedly different than the way he has talked to them in the past 2 episodes or 2.5 episodes, 2 episodes and 2 minutes. Like, it's a definite change. One thing that I would have improved on, there is one specific moment when Jod is found out, and the way that they write this scene is the guard comes up to Jod and he's like, "You're Professor Gorlock from Scipio." And Jod turns and runs, and that's what sets him off. I'm a Star Wars lore nerd. even I miss that that's because Professor Gorlock is immune from Scipio, the banking planet.
Yeah.
And because Scipio, it's one of the very few moments where the show relies on you already knowing a piece of Star Wars knowledge to get. And I feel like that's the one single moment that I think didn't come across well because it relies on you having watched the Clone Wars episodes on Scipio with that fuck-ass banker guy that Anakin beats the shit out of. Like, you have to have known that in order to for that moment to, like, really make sense. Like, it still works. It still works that Jod's like, fuck, I'm running away. But I don't think you really get why unless you've watched those arcs. Bradley, what about you?
For me, my favorite moment, I think just thing I liked about the episode, because this is a really hard one for me because this was like such a good episode. I think this one and next week are such a great two-parter. But this week, I think my favorite moment was just the Whim lightsaber moment. I won't go into too much detail until we get to it, but that lightsaber moment, I saw it coming from a mile away. And like as it was happening, I was like, that lightsaber's upside down. And I noticed it right away, and I just thought it was really funny. So that moment was probably my favorite thing in the episode. And I just love how he gets his quote unquote hero moment here, and he kind of blows it. But he does get it later on in the series again, but in a similar fashion. So I think they did a good job of kind of showing you like, here's his moment. Just kidding, that wasn't really his moment kind of thing. One thing I would improve on, God, it's so hard. I think you like what you said was I think the episode does really good job of like keeping pace and just trying to like pick and choose its moments as it goes. Maybe plot wise, I understand why they kind of separated, but like just because like that's quite a classic trope, like let's split up, our chances will be greater of finding the thing, blah blah blah. I think maybe just because it doesn't really do anything other than make the guards come after them, like that's the only reason why they split up, because they immediately separate but then they immediately get back together and then just go into the temple or whatever it is. So I don't know, maybe
the secret lost pirate cave,
right, the lair or whatever. Like I interchange, by the way, when I do my notes I interchange it like lair, maze, I keep treasure room, I keep changing all the names. But yeah, I just thought maybe like it was just like an extra step for them to be separated and just come back together anyway. Maybe if they just all stay together and then all were chased by the guards and then all like, I don't know, there could have been a more concise way to do it, I think, but it's not like super important. I think it just, for me, I would have probably just liked them just stay together just to kind of simplify it a little bit more. But yeah.
Bradley, you want to take us into section 1?
We open on Atten, where Numa gives Wendell a device to steal the barrier access code so they can get a message to their kids. A security droid catches him in the process and reports to Farah. She powers the droid down and erases the evidence. She chastises Wendell for not using the proper channels, but he doubts the supervisor will actually help them locate the kids.
I love how comically bad Wendell is at this. And Loreley, you were talking about this sequence as the thing that you really like. I love how just completely inept he is at being subtle whatsoever because he's never had to do it.
Yeah, this is asking, like, this is one of the things where it being the suburb is like kind of important to the character construction, because this is like asking just like a normal guy who works in a cubicle in an office to do a crime, and he's really bad at it. And it's fun, it's silly, and it's funny, and it's like really lighthearted, even though it's this like kind of serious emotional drive for the parents. And I think one of the things that this show does really well is balance the emotional needs of the characters with the kind of more kid-friendly entertainment that the show, because this is ostensibly a kid show. This is actually an episode that I think really explores what it means to be a kid show also, but we can talk about that in a different section where it's more relevant. And this beginning is just, it's fun and it's good character moments, and I just really liked it.
Yeah, and I think the adrenaline spike too, if you're not prepared for it, because I get that people are asking like, oh, why doesn't he just like shove the thing under his desk, or why doesn't he drop it into a drawer? Because we physically see shot of him like sweating and nervously looking at the droid. He's not thinking straight because he's never been in this situation before.
He's a systems analyst who follows the rules. Why would he know how to handle himself in a situation like this? He's not Jod.
No. And I also think that he works in such a great contrast to Farah as well, because we see that Farah is much cooler headed in this. Like, she's immediately like knows what to do, shuts the blinds, completely on top of it. But the difference is that Farah, because she's in this position of authority, trusts the system more implicitly than Wendell does. She has to, because of the nature of her job, trust that the system is going to operate as intended. She is the system. And I love that choice about the conflict that they have. It's such a short scene, but it tells us so much about both of these characters.
Yeah, the expediency with which we understand how both of those characters exist in the world and in relation to their children, like because they both have these mirroring moments where they mirror how their children behave, is just it's very efficient characterization and storytelling, and I really like that about it.
Even
and all
Numa
happens before the title card, so we can get through it and then get on with the pirate adventure.
Even Numa.
I was going to bring up Numa, like even like I would argue that even her character aspect is that she's willing to do anything for her kid, like even break the rules, i.e. Neil would be willing to do anything for his best friend. Like, it's just like an interesting kind of like parallel to there, because Numa doesn't seem like, obviously the blue elephant thing makes you like go, oh, she's not a serious kind of character, obviously, because that's the nature of having a giant caricature.
She shows up
elephant
at Wendell's job and is like, I need you to commit a crime.
Exactly.
Right
She's
now.
all about espionage and like, here you go, I stole this thing, like use it. Like, that's pretty
clobbed
badass.
together this fucking illegal thing in my garage, plug it into your very secure banking system. Is so funny to me that they thought this was going to work.
I was going to also bring up, I think this is where the one thing I would have improved something here. I think I just thought of it.
You thought of it?
I think KB's moms were not utilized here where they could have been, because
they're not utilized the whole fucking show. Yeah,
I know.
Yeah.
And that's why I think this could have been theoretically like a moment to use them. Maybe they were the ones who, I mean, as much as I love Neil's mom, I think maybe it would have made a more impact because they are such kind of sidelined in this whole entire story. They could have been the ones to come up with the plan. They could have been the ones to come up with the device. They could have been, you know what I mean? Like, I needed them to have a more proactive role in saving clearly their daughter who has a health issue that they're worried about, kind of thing. You'd think they would be the most proactive out of all the parents.
Even just a line to say that they're the ones that built it together, because that's such a KB family thing, because we know that KB is big on the mechanics. We will see KB in literally the next scene talk about having gone in and fucked with 33's programming. And yet we get absolutely no indication of who built this device, and there was a perfect opportunity for it. It's frustrating. I do agree. It is frustrating.
I agree that I wish we saw more of KB's parents throughout the whole show, but I don't really have anything else.
In the next scene, on their ship, the kids are afraid to turn SM-33 back on. Once they do, 33 reveals the name of his old captain, Rennod. Jod recognizes the name and recalls the tales of the captain. SM-33 reveals the coordinates of At-Aden are located at a secret lair, and he takes them there. During the flight, SM-33 reminisces about his pirating career and details the mutiny of Captain Rennod. Meanwhile, Jod and Wim have a moment together where Jod gives him some advice to forget his attachments and make his life what he wants it to be.
All right, let's talk about the chronology, because the first time I saw this, I was very confused about the chronology, because I'm like, why does 33 kind of look like a KX unit from Rogue One? But they're on this planet, but Jod talks about him like he's legendary, but the kids don't know who he is. And I think I finally figured it out. I had to remember that the kids don't know anything about stuff outside of At-Aden.
Right.
So Tak Rennod, I think, was running around during the Imperial era, sometime in that 20-year period. That's just enough time for him to have become legendary, but close enough that like the KX unit and all of that can still work. And it can also work with the big plot twist that we will learn in episode 8. That's not really a plot twist, but that clears that up. I think the Tak Rennod and the Onyx Sender were probably active about 20 years ago.
I was thinking it was longer ago.
That's what I thought from the way Jod talks about it. But you also have to remember that the Jedi, there's like 10,000 Jedi running around, and by 15 years later, because George Lucas just writes shit and it's up to Dave Filoni and Pablo Hidalgo and the people who write reference books to try to figure out why, that everybody thinks they're a myth. Like Han Solo doesn't believe they exist in A New Hope.
Right.
So I think they got to be active at least mid-Imperial era.
See, I'm thinking they were active during prequel era.
Really?
Yeah, only because everything we know about the ship, and then when it crashes and everything, like it crashes on this planet that's still active of treasure, obviously. Like, well, we're gonna learn all these details later, but I think that it's during the Republic era because of the way that like he concocted this ship to go in and out of Ad and I'm thinking it's all got to be that time because or at least Old Republic, because it doesn't make sense that because there's not really active pirates like that during Imperial as much because
there's so many. No, there's literally so many. Like, this is a big deal in the comics, and they just released a whole video game about it. It's a big deal in Rebels. There's actually more piracy there's a lot of piracy during the Clone Wars, but there's also a lot of piracy during the Imperial era because the Imperials aren't really stopping them. They're kind of more busy oppressing planets and doing genocides. So they don't really care about stopping random pirates. Not to get super political or Star Wars having any sort of commentary on fascism, but the fascists being slightly more concerned with stamping out anyone who might disagree with their fascism instead of taking care of criminal syndicates running around. That's definitely a thing in Star Wars. But Star Wars is not political. I throw that out there. Star Wars is not political at all. But we do see it in the Imperial era. And we've talked about it in a previous episode. We talked about it with Andy on our episode 3 when we talked about the relationship between the Empire and the criminal element.
Yeah, circling back to the timeline thing, it's a little confusing because they talk about ancient pirates. Various characters do. And they also, like, anytime someone says the word Old Republic out loud, it's like, okay, do you mean like capital O Old Republic, like the era? Or like, are you talking about the Old Republic, like up until the moment the Empire was formed? And where does that sit? So are we talking, like, if we just hear the word Old Republic in Star Wars timeline, we're looking at like 10,000 years of history that it could fall into. And so I don't actually know where the show ends up. I think it ends up on like that late Republic, pre-Empire time period, but I wasn't clear on that. I don't think it's as important for this show specifically, unless you're really nerdy about Star Wars.
Which, I don't know if you figured this out by now. I am. So I ran into the problem of I insisted for 8 fucking episodes that AT-AT got lost during the Old Republic time period, which in Legends, the Old Republic encompassed the entire history of the Galactic Republic.
Yeah.
Why we have Star Wars The Old Republic. But in canon, the Old Republic really at this point is a specific time period.
Yeah.
Because they mention in Rebels the fall of the Old Republic. Mm-hmm. And so I thought they meant Old Republic like back in the time when the Mandalorians were laying siege to the Jedi Temple in totally not a Star Wars The Old Republic reference that happens in Rebels. And only realized after the fact that no, they're talking about the Old Republic encompassing the entire history of the Republic.
Yeah.
Because I also thought Rennod had to be an ancient pirate because I was thinking...
They call him an ancient pirate also. So like...
Well, Jod doesn't really. The hotelier...
it says an ancient pirate den.
I do have an explanation for that.
Yeah.
And that is that marketing lies.
Correct.
Fair.
And I don't disagree. And so it's just when like nobody comes out and says a date that any of this happened, because that would be nonsensical because this is a story. But I think it works perfectly fine for the show because it adds an air of mystery and Star Wars being about mythical adventures and kind of adding folklore and mythology to real history. Perfect for Star Wars. Really frustrating on the nerdy side of when did this actually happen. And yeah, I think prequel era, I think is around when I was thinking maybe he crossed paths with little Padawan Anakin in those 10 years between episodes 1 and 2.
Maybe there'll be a comic
that still haven't really been explored.
Well, right. And so this is like in kind of going back to our conversation about like you have these huge IPs, but there's lots of things you can dredge up from the past and make new stuff in the present about. Part of that is just like knowing where things were only ever hinted at, where there is like something rich you can explore that has a tie to something from 30 years ago that didn't actually have a lot of information, which means you can now explore in the present. Acolyte did this, and this show kind of existing in some of that space is neat and good.
I also, speaking of branding, I have to point out that Skull Ridge Mountain is incredible pirate naming. Unbelievably good pirate naming on the part of Rennod, because oh boy, Skull Ridge Mountain, what a fucking amazing pirate ass name.
There's a moment in the sequence right after this where SM33 is talking about the names for the world that I'm just like, I know the whiteboard that they had in the writer's room that had 100 different names on it that they culled down to the handful that appear in the episode. And it's a really fun moment because like one of the things this episode does really well is juxtaposes like the piratical worldview with the, I'm gonna say suburban worldview, but there's more to it than that, as these like competing facades over reality, which is going to tie into like some stuff that Jod says later and the way some of these character moments are treated, and just excellent ways of making these like competing constructions of how the world is. And the pirate side of it is so fun. Like they just this whole show leans really hard into the fun of pirate stories, especially from the perspective of a child watching the media, and it's great.
Shout out to the incredibly fun pirate music, because that's on like repeat in my brain. That dun 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 dun. I love it. I love it. I love how piratey the show is.
Yeah, there's a way of thinking about Star Wars that I think I have found personally very helpful, and that a lot, I've seen a lot of people talk about where Star Wars is as kind of an IP, and Star Wars being a template which you can use to tell other stories, and space opera as a genre being a template that you can shift into other genre spaces. This is one of the places where I think Star Wars has been most successful as television in the last couple of years. Mando season 1 leaned hard into the Western. Andor leaned really hard into a specific kind of almost 70s style and 80s style spy story. And this is leaning really hard into this kind of 80s and early 90s pirate story. And even the way the music is pirate music, but it's not Star Wars music.
No, it's composed by the Rogue One guy's son.
Yeah. And so like the way everything in the show is both Star Wars, authentically Star Wars, but also authentically these other genre spaces and these other influence spaces. Like there are so many ways, I won't go into like and specifically and the suburbs, but the way those suburbs feel Star Warsy, but also suburbsy is really great. The tassels on the hoverbike is the thing that sold me on this show in terms of like Star Wars suburb world building, but that's not this episode.
Jumping ahead several notes, because I want to kick off what you said to a point that I had about a later part of this section. It also is kind of in conversation with other elements of its own IP, because we get the scene with Jod and Wim, and Jod completely fucking misquotes Qui-Gon Jinn. In this episode, where he basically tells Wim, hey, ignore your family. Like, those are just attachments. Focus on what you want, and your focus determines your reality. And I'm like, that's not what that means, Jod. That is not what that means.
That scene, I think, is really important for a lot of what this episode specifically is building around, and the show in general, because, we have these questions of like, well, is Jod really a Jedi? Is he actually actually moving things with the Force, or is he moving things with strings? Like, we are still at a point where, what is Jod's complicated backstory? How much, I had a lot of thoughts about his age and the timeline and potential connections to Jedi. And so this moment being the Jod is not really exhibiting Jedi behavior, but he's not sort of doing it.
Saying all the Jedi words.
Yeah.
Like he's saying the words, but they're kind of in the right order, but the intentionality behind them, if you've never seen another Star Wars, if you come into Skeleton Crew and this is your first Star Wars, which it can be, I mean, it understands that it can be, you look at the scene and go, that's kind of a weird thing to say to a kid.
Yeah.
But if you've watched Star Wars and you have Star Wars brain rot, and it's been sitting on your brain for 30 years of your life, then you go, wait a minute. That sounds like somebody who's heard the no attachments thing, but didn't sit in their classes about the no attachments thing.
And especially the way, like, I think a lot about how he was perfectly fine letting Wim cry on the floor and was going to walk away until he heard that Wim's mom is dead. And then he's like, I'll go be like an adult here, which is an important note for a Jod revelation later in the show.
One of the few times he does actually act like an adult around the kids is when he does this very Treasure Planet moment of, I'm going to talk to the kid. I had that in a note. I wanted to be sure I brought up the Treasure Planet moment specifically.
I was going to say, this is basically the same scene.
This is basically the same, because that also fucks with you. Because if you've watched Treasure Planet, again, if you understand the IP that you're coming into this with, if you've watched Treasure Planet, you know, oh, this is just the Long John Silver, Jim Hawkins thing.
Right.
But something's off here. The vibes are rancid.
Well, to be fair, the Long John Silver, Jim Hawkins scene in every version of the Treasure Island story, the vibes are supposed to be off too. That's Long John Silver's whole deal. But it's also very interesting because, like, if we're talking about like 80s and 90s pirate stories, Muppet Treasure Island is in there. Treasure Planet is very obviously in this space treasure seeking genre space. This show is in conversation with a lot, but my specific note on the line of like, your focus determines your reality feels really important for this. Jod's whole focus in this episode, and one of the things really driving tension between him and his children, is everywhere he looks, all he can see is people who want to kill him. All he can see is a universe where everything is bad and sucks, and he has to claw and scrape his way to get anything. That's the only way he can interpret reality. And there's almost this like lament in his voice when he tells Wim that, like, he's like, hey, Wim, you have a great imagination. You can see adventures in everything. And there's a kind of sadness that, like, he almost envies the way Wim can, like, take this shitty situation and turn it into a fun adventure. That there is like a way Wim can see reality in a way that Jod no longer can. And that's going to come up in a later moment where I think them being in two separate teams is really important for supporting this, but that's on a later scene.
Very quickly before we move on to the next section, I do need to point out that I mentioned earlier in episode, I think 2, I mentioned that everything was going to tie together vis-a-vis like what they discover when they get on board the Onyx Sender. And 33 does explain how the dagger ends up in the corpse on the wall.
Yeah.
And I also do have to point out that the line, what's a concubine?
Okay, good.
Sends me on the floor every time I watch this episode.
Neil's just, what's a concubine? And Jod immediately changing the subject because he doesn't want to have to explain to children what sex work is.
What a concubine is.
And then, like, what? And it's just like,
glorious.
It's like, and it's so funny. And it's like, when we get to the actual planet, there's this juxtaposition of these children are from the suburbs and they don't know anything about the world, and they're in like an adults only resort, and like especially after, because it was episode 2 when they're at the pirate cove.
It's episode 2 that they meet Melna at the pirate thing, and the cabaret worker who's one of only 2 fucking adults so far in this plot to be responsible adult.
Yeah, they're in the pirate cove, and the sex worker who works at this pirate strip club is the only person who gives a shit of like, oh my god, little girls in a pirate cove, you're not being trafficked, are you?
It's a cabaret. We've discovered that everybody has a different idea. We thought it was a brothel because of Andor.
You can
it's
see
a cabaret.
Okay.
It's called a cabaret, so we have to go with the
Okay,
purity
it's a
of the story.
cabaret that has colorful lights and images of girls dancing behind those silhouettes, behind those lights. Sure. With a woman who's worried about little girls being trafficked. It's a cabaret. Fine.
It's a cabaret because it's Star Wars.
Well,
Even though we can have fucking brothels in Andor, but okay.
Andor is very specifically also shooting for an adult audience, and this is a show that is specifically aiming for family viewing. I was actually genuinely surprised to see that there was like pirate strip club at the Cove, and this episode also kind of dances around what exactly this spa is for.
Oh yeah,
and why there's no children allowed. It's adults only, and like what's up? Because Neil reprises his "What's a concubine" with a "What's a pleasure barge" later in the episode, and I'm just like, this kid is great.
In the next scene, the ship arrives to the planet Lanupa, which turns out to be a luxury resort rather than a terrifying pirate mountain. The children disguise themselves as they approach the adults-only resort, and they are greeted by the hotelier. She begins to give them a tour of the facilities, and once she checks them in, Jod bribes her so no questions are asked. Jod is interrupted when he is approached by a bounty hunter named Pocket. She warns the kids not to trust him. In their suite, SM-33 explains that Captain Rennod marked the entry to his lair with a sigil, and they split up into teams to find the lair. Meanwhile, the bounty hunter contacts Brutus to let him know Jod is at the resort and sends him the coordinates.
Lanupa is new. We have never seen this planet before. And I'm just going to read my note on this planet verbatim. Welcome to the spas at Skull Mountain. Parentheses, a Walt Disney Company resort, in parentheses.
That's what it sounds like.
That's what it fucking sounds like.
I love that.
My immediate thought was the Walt Disney resorts coming in and like dropping random resorts places and turning it into like commodified brand stuff, which I love when Star Wars accidentally critiques the Walt Disney Company.
And this is where like this entire spa has, as like a luxury adult spa, has this air of artificiality to it.
Right.
That's right in line with the artificiality of the suburbs of Anne. There is a way in which everything in this world is constructed. There are rules and mores in which govern this space, which is like completely parallels the pirate code, everything the pirates work for. The way Jod exists between all of it and slimily wriggles around every construction he can for his own benefit in this episode, it's great.
And I think it's really interesting compared to the pirate port that they visit in episode 2, how both of them are spaces that are more geared for adults, but at the spas at Skull Mountain, a Walt Disney Company resort, there are literally armed guards enforcing that there are these guards walking around going, we are making absolute sure that everyone is enjoying the spas at Skull Mountain, a Walt Disney Company resort, exactly the way that the not Walt Disney Company wants you to be enjoying the resort. I love that. I also love the practiced speech in which this customer service rep is describing the place.
Yeah, she's a fascinating character for someone who has a bit role in this episode. You can see the artificiality of her smile start to break as the piece of shit spaceship lands, and she turns to one of the guards and says like, "Hey, be prepared to call waste removal on these people." And then the moment Jod walks out, she snaps like right back into customer service mode, and it's great. It's great, and I'm so happy. The face Jod makes when he gets handed a martini. That guy is so happy in that one moment.
I've worked in customer service, and the artificiality of the smile, the way that this woman has what I call a customer service voice, you can tell she's so practiced at this.
There are just so many small things that this show does that makes all of the characters really feel alive in ways. And characters that, like, I don't want to say like characters that don't matter, but like this is a very minor character. We won't be seeing her again. You know, I don't even know if this character got a Star Wars name.
I don't even think
she actually
she's
does
unidentified,
not.
Unidentified hotelier.
Yeah, unfortunately.
And
I thought she did, but she doesn't.
Shout out to Julie Ann Emery, who is playing the unidentified hotelier, for absolutely fucking nailing this role. Bradley, I don't know if you looked Julie Ann Emery up at all.
I did.
But okay, do you want to give us some details on Julie Ann Emery?
Sure. So some of the things she's best known for is her reoccurring role on Better Call Saul. She's also been in the show Preacher and Fargo. So she's done some pretty
Who did she
high-name
play
shows.
in Fargo?
I didn't look specifics up because usually when I do the character, I'm always like, I have no idea who that is.
That's okay. I have it literally up in front of me.
Oh, you do? Okay.
I can tell you Ida Thurman on 4 episodes of Fargo.
Oh, which season?
Yeah, because isn't Fargo like every season?
Season 1.
Okay. My memory of season 1 isn't going to be strong enough, but this is not a Fargo podcast, but I will say if you like prestige primetime television, the Fargo television show is fucking incredible. Noah Hawley is killing it. I'm in like the middle of season 5 because I'm a little behind, but show is really, really excellent.
I'll add that to my increasingly growing list.
Yeah, that's a mood.
Yeah, I have to point out too, as we're walking around the spas at Skull Mountain, they do mention the banking clan, the intergalactic banking clan, and we do see Munes in the bath. So that was a fun touch that we've got a bunch of naked Munes sitting around in the bath. That was funny.
I also think it's just like Star Wars is not political
at all. Not in the slightest.
Not in the slightest. But like to be sitting here after the fall of the Empire and the banking clan is still around to the point where they have like luxury like conferences, and after, they had the banking clan had Senate representation in the Republic
and then got nationalized.
And then just like I think a lot about the Andor episode back on Coruscant a lot. Was it Andor? No, that was Mando season 3.
Mando season 3 was the one where they go back to Coruscant and basically all the systems are still... So like Palpatine has this big deal.
The eugenics episode.
Yeah. Palpatine has this big deal in the Clone Wars where he's like, I'm bringing the banks under my control.
Yeah.
In Legends, they just got straight up nationalized. In canon, they kind of get integrated in to the eventual empire. But I think you're right, Loreley. I do find it interesting that they're still around and they survived when none of the other corporate guilds that were backing the separatist movement seem to have survived to this point.
And it's like, I think a lot about the Techno Union also, because there's a line in this episode when they're putting the restraining bolt on SM-33. The specific line is, droids have been used as weapons in the past. And we are now... I mean, this show is like rough. I don't know exactly where this fits in the kind of like post-Empire show scape, because the one pirate shows up in Mando later, and this is clearly before that.
This is after that.
Is it?
Because
I thought
so
he
the
died.
Pirate. No, he fucks off.
I didn't remember that specifically. Okay, that's good to know. But we're like vaguely 25, 30 years after the Clone Wars, and like people are still worried about like battle droids. And so just like every time I love battle droids. Oh, this is a fun. Your listeners are all Star Wars fans. I have a tattoo of a battle droid pinup.
Really?
Yes. That an artist at a studio had as a flash duo. Was like, the B1 battle droid is the perfect Star Wars mook, and I adore them. I need to collect them and put them on a farm where they'll be safe from everyone else and especially themselves. I love battle droids so much. And
have you ever watched the Freemaker Adventures? It got pulled off of Disney Plus for some stupid fucking reason I can't figure out. Have you ever watched this show?
I have not.
Highly recommend tracking down and watching the Freemaker Adventures.
I will keep that in mind.
I don't want to say too much. Just Freemaker Adventures. If you like the B1 battle droids and you want more B1 battle droid content,
I want them so much.
That show.
Clone Wars is always just going to be one of my favorite Star Wars things, because that's a show that understood the comedy of the B1 battle droid. God, they're so dumb.
Matthew Wood, congratulations on just getting to do the B1 battle droid voice forever and everything. He's kind of become the new Anthony Daniels in that anytime there's a battle droid, it's Matthew Wood. In the same way that every time C-3PO is in a thing for 30 years, it's Anthony Daniels. Like, basically no one else ever voices C-3PO. which has got to be a fun gig to just voice the battle droids and General Grievous every time they show up in Star Wars.
I'm also unsurprisingly also a huge General Grievous fan.
Tracks what we have learned about you over the course of recording this episode. Speaking of Legends stuff, Pocket, who we're going to talk about in a minute, has a line where she refers to Jod as Dash Zenton. I wasn't able to confirm this anywhere, but Dash Zenton kind of sounds like Dash Rendar, who was the central character of the Star Wars multimedia project Shadows of the Empire, which was kind of a big Star Wars deal because it was essentially this transmedia initiative to where they made all the tie-ins for a movie that didn't exist. So they had a game, they had a novel, they had a fucking soundtrack concept album for this thing.
Wild.
And they had this new character that they brought in to kind of, because it's between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, the character they brought in to fill the Han Solo archetype that's not Han Solo was this guy named Dash Rendar, who's really only ever shown up in this. I don't think he ever comes back into the Legends story, but he is pretty beloved because a lot of people who are my age grew up with the game. Do not recommend rereading the book. It's bad, but a lot of people hold on to like the game very strongly. So this is probably a reference to Dash Rendar, if I had to guess. Hey, Bradley, who's playing Pocket and do they have a Disney trifecta?
So I couldn't find the Disney trifecta, so there's no Marvel.
Damn.
But I will say, so Kelly MacDonald is playing Pocket. She is a Scottish actress. She's best known for Train Spotting and No Country for Old Men, but Disney fans would know her best as the voice of Disney Princess Merida in Pixar's Brave. So there you go.
She's so fun in this
She's
episode.
Not to be a lesbian, but I'm a big Pocket fan. But also like very specifically a thing that has happened since I guess Clone Wars started it, and then a lot of these more recent TV initiatives have really continued. Star Wars has historically broadly used British accents if you're from the core systems and American accents if you're from the Outer Rim, because also, again, those are the only two places we ever show in Star Wars. And something that's been like really delightful is that Star Wars accents have filled out a lot since then. And just getting more and more accents. I think a lot about Kit Fisto. Terrible with names.
Do not remember who. Are you thinking of the person who's playing Kit Fisto?
Yeah.
Fuck. So we have a section on the show called The Thing Charles We Didn't Research.
Phil Lamar. There we go.
Phil Lamar. Yes, is voicing
prolific
Kit Fisto.
VA. He's great. I've written for him a couple times. He's extremely talented, and just like I think a lot about the Jamaican accent that Kit Fisto has in Clone Wars as kind of the start of opening up, you know, the plethora of accents we actually get to hear in the Star Wars universe.
And then Diego, I would be remiss if I didn't also shout out Diego Luna insisting on using Mexican accent for Cassian Andor. That was Diego Luna insisting that no, this is the accent I'm going to use for the character.
It's Star Wars as a galaxy that has purported to, you know, be for everyone, getting to have more and more and more accents represented that way is nice to hear, and makes the galaxy feel more complex and more diverse than just if you have this English accent, you're from here, and if you have this American accent, you're from here. And so that's fun.
I also love that she refers to low rent guild jobs, and she also refers to pucks. So we're tying it into the Mandoverse. What?
You do the Leonardo DiCaprio point.
Yep. So if you've watched the Mandoverse, you'll pick up. But the thing I really like about this show is it, again, with Skeleton Crew being one of the subtlest Star Wars shows we've seen, it's such a subtle nod to the rest of the Mandoverse in a way that turning to the audience to announce that this is taking place after Mandalore really doesn't feel like it integrates that well into the scene in which it's in Ahsoka, which is otherwise one of my favorite scenes of the entire show. The bit where they kind of turn to the audience to go, no, this is after the fall of Mandalore and Moff Gideon. This one feels like it's more subtly part of that world.
Yeah.
Which I really like. I really like that as a choice because it makes sense. You can gloss right on over it and you'll get the basic idea of what a guild job is and why
Yeah.
she's referring to it so derisively.
Yeah, we also get to do the Leo point because she calls Jod a slamo, and I'm just like, the Star Wars
Yes.
word.
Star Wars insults. Well, you can't call him a shitbag, even though you know that's what she's thinking, is that
Yeah.
he's a shitbag.
We get to see our fantasy swear, which is great. But yeah, no, I also agree that like, which is why, like, you know, you talked about the whole we're supposed to infer that they know Jod is lying because he's the wrong alien species, but you can only get there if you know about the banking plan and Scipio and whatnot. And like, I understand that, but it is like, it's weird for this show specifically.
Right. It's something I expect from a Filoni Favreau joint.
Exactly.
It's something I expect to have to. I do something called the boyfriend test.
Uh-huh.
With the boyfriend test, the point is he's familiar enough with Star Wars, and he also has a very good head for remembering detail. Obviously, he remembers Magic the Gathering lore. Like,
yeah,
this is how his brain works. He remembers these things. So whenever something will happen on screen, I will say something to him, or we will watch something, and if it calls back to something else, I will ask him, like, I will mention something, like, I will mention, I don't know, Mon Mothma, and he will say, who's that? I then give him an example of the character. I say, oh, well, it's that redheaded lady from Andor. And if he goes, oh, yeah, and we continue on, then the thing has passed the boyfriend test. If he recognizes it with a little prompting, he knows. Like, it's good. It's a good inclusion. If his response is, what? Then a thing has failed it, because not only did he not remember this thing, he needed to have known this thing to understand the plot point that's happening. Skeleton Crew almost entirely passes the boyfriend test. Like, it's everything that happened in it that called back, absolutely, he totally followed what was going on.
Yeah, you don't need to have watched Mando to understand that Pocket is a bounty hunter, because we're just told she's a bounty hunter. And these details about the guilds and the pucks accentuates the world building if you also watch this other thing, but it's not necessary to understand anything about this moment in the show, which is how those references should be used. Yeah, no, just delightful and great.
I love Jod being fucking done with the kids by the time he gets to the suite, because he's just like, I'm gonna fucking die. And I think it goes back to that point you made, Loreley, about Jod can only see the world in terms of everybody's out to get him. And he knows that Pocket's fucking coming for his ass.
Yeah. Which is his own fault, but he'll never admit that, because like he externalizes all his own faults, that the world is this way because it's bad, not that I've been a shitty person to everyone I've ever met and they all want to kill me because of it. But like, this is also a moment where I think this is really the first episode, especially when they're jumping on the bed and having a pillow fight, you know, which is like suburban kids in a fancy hotel for the first time, just tracks. Children behaving like children, which is like key point in making stories and telling stories about children, is like, I have to believe that they're actually children and not just small adults. And this is definitely a moment where I believe these are children, but it's also the first moment where we've really seen all four of the kids acting together as a unit who is enjoying their time together. That there is this youthful camaraderie that they didn't have at the beginning of the show, where during this adventure, they've all become friends, and Jod is still separate from all of that. That there is a sense of loyalty and friendship that Jod just cannot access as a character. And his interaction with Pocket and the kids screwing around to being kids together just in the same room is like such good thematic resonance for how all of these characters are existing in these moments.
Speaking of the kids, I also want to note just how hard KB's initial reaction to being told you're going to go down into the spa is, no, I can't do that. And then when pressed, she immediately backs off and starts downplaying her own, we find out in the next episode, very serious medical condition.
Yeah, this episode 6 the KB moments in episode 6 might be my favorite moments in the entire show. I really love KB as a character. I was a little worried early on because KB doesn't get a lot of characterization early, but it's all in this back half of the show, and it's so good. But yeah, like even KB, who has been like, it's just nice getting to see her be a kid with the other kids. but then still doing her KB things of like cataloging all the writing they find around the thing and knowing exactly what nut to loosen on the mud pipes to spray mud at the guards.
I do love the mud pipe spray guard sequence that happens in the next section. Because it's just a wonderful KB moment because we see that she's very analytical.
Mm-hmm.
She will look at a situation. She clocks Jod immediately.
Yeah.
She knows his ass is full of shit.
Yeah, it's great. She clocks him immediately, but also doesn't know how to solve any of the problems that the kids are running into, so has to defer to Jod. And you get to see some of her waffling about is Jod good or bad because of that. And I think it's an interesting angle compared to like, Wim buying in immediately and Neil buying in immediately and Fern kind of not caring. I like these kids. They're all different in fun ways.
In the next scene, while on the hunt for the lair, Team Jod are confronted by the guards, and they give chase. Team Fern finds Rennod's symbol in the lair, and when they are confronted by a guest named Cathala. The teams group together, and after they entertain him with stories, he helps them by opening an entrance to the lair. Meanwhile, the pirates arrive to the resort. In the maze, Jod warns them of booby traps, and the pirates follow them into the maze. After a few obstacles, like a pool of acid, they find the treasure room as the pirates close in.
Bradley, do you have any voice actor notes on who is voicing Catholips? I just want to get this right out of the way.
You know what's funny is that's the one I actually forgot to do.
That's
the
okay.
big,
I
giant
have him up in front of me. Catholips is being voiced by Patrick Seitz. Patrick Seitz has been a voice actor for a long fucking time, doing a lot of fucking things. He has 616 acting credits on IMDb. I scrolled through it all last night. It is mostly voice acting and mostly anime and video game. Notably, he's Artanis in StarCraft II Legacy of the Void. And in Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe, he is Scorpion and Deathstroke. I know him because I was like, I know this voice. I know this voice from somewhere. Basically everything from around Miss Pandaria onwards for World of Warcraft. He is the voice of both Garrosh Hellscream and Arthas Minethel. Names that mean fuck all to Bradley, but hopefully will mean something to someone in the audience who knows how iconic the voices of Garrosh and Arthas are. So that's who is actually voicing Catholips here. I just think about World of Warcraft a lot. I can't get away from it. I started playing this game in 2009, and I haven't stopped thinking about it since, which is really unfortunate. The War Within is as good as it is. We get a tiny little moment with, it's called a Trogloff, by the way. This attendant that gets eaten by the hut.
I was like, what word are you calling me right now?
It's my new insult for you, Bradley. You're a tiny little Trogloff.
There you go. That actually would be a funny insult to
That
sell
would be
somebody,
a funny
and then
insult.
they have no idea what you're talking about.
First debuted in, according to the StarWars.com trivia guide, shout out to whoever writes these, apparently first debuted in The Last Jedi as one of the casino table guys in Canto Bight. It is Canto Bight, by the way, Hope. I'm in your walls, not bright, Canto Bight. Bite. There's no R. So that's who this alien is that's being eaten by the hut, who is apparently just a random hut. Although I
was hoping this
it turns out to be. Loreley, do you know about the Mandalorian and Grogu casting news that's absolutely fucking batshit insane?
Yeah, because it drives me insane because
that's who I hope this is.
I wouldn't be like it. It's a thing that I was expecting. Talk about overusing a thing to the point where our cute little thing becomes overused. Is it's not stinky, but
right.
Oh God, that Clone Wars movie. Every time they call each other Sky Guy and Snips later in Clone Wars, the show, I'm just like, you don't need to do it. We got enough of it in the one movie to last the entire series.
Yeah, I'm hoping this is stinky. But we're talking about the casting news that Jeremy Allen White is going to be Rada the Hutt, who is the actual name for Stinky the Huttlet in the Clone Wars movie. That is such an important deal in the Clone Wars movie and only ever comes up one other time in the entire show, which is crazy. He comes up one other time. There's an episode that Katie Lucas wrote about her dad's character in Revenge of the Sith. And there's a moment where her dad's character, Baron Papanoida, says to Jabba the Hutt, he's like, I know you are also a father. So he's appealing to Jabba, one father to another. And that's like the only other time Stinky ever comes up.
Yeah.
In the Aftermath books by Chuck Wendig, the original plot for Freetown, which is the Cobb Vanth stuff in The Mandalorian, the original plot for Freetown ends with them finding a baby Huttlet and taking the baby Huttlet in, and they're going to raise this Huttlet collectively in Freetown as a group. This is literally never mentioned in any of the Mandoverse or Book of Boba Fett stuff at all. But it's a thing that happens in Freetown. So it's kind of implied that Huttlet is Rada, but we don't know for sure. I don't think Rada ever comes up in any of the comic. We don't fucking know.
The only reason why I don't want this to be Rada, only because, for the sheer fact of, I just don't want it to be him because I want the Jeremy Allen White Rada the Hutt to be shredded for no reason whatsoever. Because I think that would be fucking hilarious to finally see a ripped Hutt in like the new era of Star Wars. I just think that would be really funny.
They're
to kind of get a
canonical.
trip.
They're in the
No,
comics.
I know, and I've seen pictures of them like in the comics and stuff. So like I think that would be such a funnier like thing because like we always see the kind of like the slug version, like the essentially the giant whatever version, the Jabba version of all these things. He's kind of the blueprint for what the Hutts are supposed to be like. And then we saw the twins in Book of Boba Fett, and I think that it would just be so much funnier if Rada is like gladiator-esque, like he's got like abs and everything. That's my dream for the Mandalorian Grogu movie.
I just love the entire concept of this pirate lair. I mentioned before, number one, it's so Goonies. Like it's painfully Goonies. But number two, the acid trap. I want to talk about the acid trap specifically. The acid trap is an amazing twist on what we think we know going into the scene. Because I had the same reaction when I watched the scene for the first time that Neil did, which is, oh, the greatest sacrifice is a life, a human life. No, it's fucking money.
Yeah.
It's giving up your money.
And like this is continuing kind of the themes of these what are the competing worldviews of Jod versus the children. And so like Jod's half of the team split up is he gets caught in a lie and is chased by security guards. But Wim's side of it is he trades stories with a guy and like makes a personal connection. And that opens the path without any problems. And now he has an ally that has their back. And it just like further exemplifying how the two of them move through the world and like deal with the people around them. And yeah, you get down to the pool and the kids are like worried about like, oh, human, it's always weird to say like human life in something like Star Wars, but like a life is the most important
generally.
Thing. And Jod is just like, nah, man, it's money. These are pirates. This is where like the artificiality of the spa really feels fake as the pirate stuff and Jod's worldview, because money also talks in the spa. Like the whole bribing moment at the counter, it's like there is no place on this planet where these children are safe, because there's pirates on one side and adults only luxury space capitalism on the other side. And it's like the Cathalops moment is like, and I kind of groaned when I was like, oh, they're putting a Cthulhu character here. And the more I think about it, it's just like, because that felt very jarring. And the more I think about it, like playing on the cultural capital of like the cosmic horror that destroys everything. And actually, he's just a friendly guy.
He's just
if you tell him stories.
Which I love, by the way.
It's a great version of that. I love that too. There's a great song. There's a pop punk band called the Dolly Rots who have a song called Emo Cthulhu, which is all about how like everyone thinks Cthulhu is this terrible monster, but he's really depressed about it because he's just a guy who wants to have friends, but he's gigantic and scaly and clawed and everyone is afraid of him. That it feels like this is a moment where it's like the thing that's supposed to be scary is actually just a nice guy, and if you actually try and connect with people, you can move forward.
I love that Cathalops is just a decent decent dude. I also love going back to the acid pool scene, the juxtaposition you mentioned, Loreley, between the kids and Jod.
Mm-hmm.
Kids come from a planet where money does not really have a lot of value to them.
Yeah.
Because it's in such abundance. And so they are much more interested, like they value human lives more as part of the system of capital versus Jod, who's from a place where money is not. And so he doesn't value human lives because in order to participate in the systems of capital, he has to basically ruin or take other people's lives in a way that the kids, because they're so close to the nexus point of this, have never had to do, which I find really interesting to juxtapose the two characters together.
And there's the kids are sheltered. Adad is like literally sheltered from the harsh realities of the galaxy. They didn't have to deal with the Imperial takeover of the Republic and the Civil War that followed. That just passed them by. They don't even know it happened. And like, because the suburbs aren't a real place. They're a fake place that you construct an idea of safety about, but the reality is that there's a lot of shit happening in the galaxy that's actually dangerous, and the kids don't know it. And so like there's like Jod represents like the most brutal version of that, which I think is good from like a characterization and a storytelling standpoint, because he gets to be the exaggerated version, which makes the juxtaposition stronger. And I think the show navigates that really well.
My final note for this section is I just have to point this out. The fucking treasure room set is amazing.
It is.
I have beautiful.
I have a specific note on this. This is so. There's a lot of talk for the show about, harkening back to like E.T. as the Spielberg blueprint. This is. And like the Goonies picks up with that too, and there's some of that here. But the Goonies also only works as a Spielberg thing because it's after he does Indiana Jones. And I have to look more at how they like. I would need to go back and watch the sequence and compare it with stuff in the 3 older Indiana Jones movies, because that's the thing I have to say now. And like I want like juicy behind the scenes production notes, because the way the establishing shot of the treasure room is filmed looks exactly like Raiders. It looks exactly like the 80s Indiana Jones Spielberg shit. And just even though the way everything is framed and lit, and the way the set is constructed, the way the camera moves, all feels exactly perfect mimicry of an Indiana Jones sequence. And that is, if you're gonna do the reference, you've got to go whole hog on it. And that is the moment where this show is like, we're gonna do the treasure room reveal in this genre space. We're doing it correctly. We're doing it the most authentically we can make it. And that is beautiful to see in a show like this.
It's also a little Temple of Doom.
Yeah.
I can kind of see Temple of Doom in the design of the fact that Rennod built himself a pirate skull throne in a room he never lets people in.
Yeah.
Like, he's not letting people in this room very often, but when he does, he says, I'm going to have a big ass chair so that when I record my little pirate very secret diaries that I'm doing, that I'm going to be sitting on my dope ass fucking chair when I'm doing it. It's such a pirate moment.
Yeah. He's
so
extra.
It's beautiful.
In the next scene, in the treasure room of Captain Rennod, they look for the coordinates. They have to hurry as the pirates are trying to get in. They find a secret switch and find the captain's log. SM-33 searches for the coordinates and finds them. Once Jod has the coordinates, though, he plays a message from the captain proving to him that the treasure of At-Aden is real and is an old Republic mint. Jod turns on the kids and challenges Fern to be captain. She tries to attack but is unsuccessful. Wim grabs a lightsaber to help but ignites it upside down. Fern yields to Jod as captain. He then orders SM-33 to take the children prisoner, but they pull a lever to escape. Jod uses the Force to collect the lightsaber on the ground and ignites it.
I think it's very notable that throughout this entire section, we never see Rennod's face.
Yeah.
That he remains a legendary figure.
Right.
And I think that's what it was. I think a lot of people going, oh, it's going to turn out to be Hondo Ohnaka.
That's what I thought,
it's going to turn out to be some person that we've seen. I'm like, No, I think the real point of it was that Rennod remains this legendary figure. It dehumanizes him, that it makes him more of this mythical pirate, the ancient mythical pirate that we have here, as opposed to it's just somebody we already know, or it's somebody who just looks like a guy.
Counterpoint to that. As much as I love that theme, now that we've finished the show, I actually do like that he's just a fantasy character, a mystery. Like, we'll never find out who he really is, right? I kind of low key want him to, so if you've ever seen Pirates of the Caribbean, they do a very similar thing to this in, I think it's the third movie, where we meet Captain Jack Sparrow's dad, right? And he's like
Captain Keith Richards. Yeah.
He's literally Jack Sparrow, but just like old, right? Like it's the same fucking thing. And it's like he has all these daddy issues, obviously, like of his dad abandoning him and all this stuff, right? Why can Captain Tack Rennod not be Hondo Ohnaka's father?
Well, he is. I think some people have done some insane deep dives into the specific frames. I think we do know that Tack Rennod is a weak way.
I'm just saying that would be such a great reveal slash like connection to like why Hondo never showed up in this show. Like that's because, XYZ, like there's a reason why, and we'll have a totally separate story where we find out that
he's not in the show because he's running a perfectly legitimate shipping operation off Batu that would never do anything shady or weird whatsoever.
Of course.
Because he's Hondo Ohnaka. You can trust him.
I just want them to be connected so badly because I just find that would be so funny if like Hondo was actually a part of Tack's like journeys and like his thing because he was his fucking son, and then like at some point before the concubine whatever kills Tack Rennod or like sets the motions to get him killed, he like abandons his son somewhere to quote unquote save him, and then Hondo thinks it's him abandoning him, but it's actually like turns out that he was trying to protect him. Or there's so many things you could do with it. I don't know. I just love the idea.
This is insane fan fiction that you're writing, by the way.
I know. I love that like Hondo has daddy issues or something. That'd be such a funny like storyline.
So more fun facts about my relation to Hondo Ohnaka is my number one favorite Star Wars character.
Really?
He is my favorite character in the entire franchise. I love that moron so much. And he shows up in Clone Wars and is just like villain of the week. And the way they like someone recognized him as a fan favorite character and they started slowly building him up. And so the way his character gets built up through the rest of Clone Wars and then the way he gets expanded on in Rebels, perfect. Love him. I did see a thing from a post-show interview that they considered putting a Hondo something in the show, but then didn't because they were like, he's a really big name and we didn't want to pull attention away from the show and stuff.
Right.
Which I think is what would have happened.
The way I talk about Hondo, 100%. Everyone would just be talking about Hondo and not about the show. And I think that's a correct decision. And I was kind of hoping that we would see some kind of reference, but now you have me believing that Tack Rennod should be his dad also, because that's
Bradley. That's the power of Bradley. That's the power of Bradley's insane bullshit conspiracy.
Lucasfilm, listen to me when I say
he will pitch an idea.
No, it's perfect. It's perfect because it has so many parallel themes with his interactions with. Why am I blanking on the main character of Star Wars Rebels?
Ezra Bridger.
Ezra Bridger.
Yeah.
His whole because he's never quite a father figure to Ezra in Rebels, but he's not
right.
Well, I think it's even closer if you look at his relationship with Katuni, the Jedi Padawan girl from the Clone Wars, who he ultimately names his ship after.
And like, I want more. I just want more Hondo Ohnaka.
Have you read? I have to ask. Have you read the audiobook of Pirate's Price?
I have not.
You should listen to the audiobook of Pirate's Price. Jim Cummings reads the audiobook for it in the Hondo voice. So it's just like having Hondo Ohnaka in your ears while he talks to you. An experience only equaled by listening to the Legends novel Maul Shadowhunter, which is read by Sam Witwer, which is having Sam Witwer's glorious voice in your ears for multiple hours doing Darth Maul.
I'm gonna start blushing if you continue talking about Sam Witwer's voice in my ears for multiple hours. I could listen to Sam Witwer voice act forever. He's so good.
He's in this show somewhere. We don't know where. He's an additional voice somewhere, but we don't know who it was that he actually voiced. He's somewhere in the pirate episodes, but we never, I think, have gotten confirmation of which additional voice in the background he's providing. But he's here because he's in fucking everything at this point. When you have the absolute gut to be in a recording session with Dave Filoni and tell him he's wrong about a piece of Star Wars lore, and it turns out he actually is wrong about a piece of Star Wars lore, you deserve to be in every Star Wars forever.
I mean, as a deep lore goob for Magic who also does a lot of production work on Magic, like sometimes you get so in the weeds with your nerdery that you forget something as obvious as they were literally in scenes together in this movie that was a huge blockbuster in 1999. That's funny. That's great.
Yep. One of my biggest checks as a writer is when I go through, because I'm working on a long running series now, when I go through and I'm reading later installments, I often have to go back and reread the early installments just to be like, have these characters already met? Did this character say a piece of information that I think they didn't say, but they might have said? It's one of the hardest fucking things to keep track of, even just in something over 3 years, let alone 30 fucking years. I do not blame Dave Filoni for getting that one wrong.
No, especially the level at which he pulls stuff out of his ass constantly.
Oh, yeah. Even I, scoring the second highest out of anyone on the written portion of the 2024 Dragon Con Star Wars Trivia Entry Exam, a fact which will be relevant possibly in later episodes of this show coverage, did not even watch these movies.
That is wild.
That is, I love this. I love the Star Wars deep lore. I love how many details you can pick out that spin out to be something completely different. Like they'll take one line and turn a whole book into it. It's wild.
Okay, bring back to Skeleton Crew.
Bringing back to Skeleton Crew. I will say too, talking about the Clone Wars, and one of the most interesting elements of the Clone Wars being the banking system and the corporate sector and how that's tied into the Clone Wars. The revelation that At-Aten is an old Republic mint. It's a money printing plant that nobody bothered to turn off is an incredible Star Wars concept.
And it ties in. So it's at this point in the show, hiding Tak Rennod's face is also just a little bit of the benefit of the doubt that maybe he survived. And there was a point, because we still hadn't seen the supervisor yet. We know nothing about the supervisor other than the supervisor's in the supervisor tower, and we all listen to the supervisor, and I'm like, if the Republic's gone, but the Min is still running, is it being run by a Tak Rennod who survived, and we're not seeing his face here because he's going to be revealed later? And I don't know, get to a future episode of this podcast to find out if that's true or not.
Find out.
I will say it's one of the smaller mysteries that gets kind of threaded along. And then we find out it's a mint.
I will say, I was fan-braining theory about what's going on with the supervisor, what's happening, et cetera, et cetera. My fucking boyfriend called it immediately, and the whole time was like, this is what's going on. I was like, sure, okay, honey.
It was one of my theories. One of my working theories was
thing.
But
and no, he was stubborn. He was like, this is what's going on. This is what's happening. And he turned out to be completely correct about the whole thing.
I think there's just enough clues, but this is a show where not everything is as it seems. I hadn't considered that, it keeps him this mythical figure, which is great. But there's also the set work here is great. The roast switch to reveal the contact pod, that mechanical piece of the set just feels so 80s Spielberg too.
And they have to physically flip it up. It's not a Star Wars button that you press. It's not
that's an Indiana Jones puzzle.
It's a switch
in our Star Wars.
I know.
If only there was some kind of professional professional connection between Star Wars and Indiana Jones. No one will ever figure that mystery out.
If only, yeah, it would be really interesting if the Ark of the Covenant was Star Wars canon. That would be absolutely wild. But of course, they would never slip references to another Lucasfilm property in the back of Star Wars: The Clone Wars and have it turn up multiple times in multiple places across Star Wars for no fucking reason at all. Speaking of things that are endemic to Star Wars, we do need to talk about Jod's sudden but inevitable betrayal. We have to...
Well-telegraphed betrayal.
Telegraphed betrayal. Like, it was gonna happen.
Yeah, we called it pretty early on, especially
we called it pretty early on. Well, because we didn't, for context, Loreley, we didn't obviously cover the show as it came out, but we've started when we have a situation, because we were thrown off by the writer strikes, and so we've been trying to catch up for the past year, is we've been recording our episode zeros early and releasing them, like we dropped ours in the middle of the Acolyte coverage, I think. Was the timing of that. We called pretty early on, I think, that Jod was eventually going to betray the kids because he's Long John Silver. Yeah. That's what Long John Silver does.
It's the same plot, basically.
But I love. I think one element of this that's really interesting to me is the moment where he's got Fern and he's got a knife to her throat and she says, "You're a grown-up."
Yeah.
Because talking about like the beginning of this episode, we talked about how Undersecretary Farah still ingrained in her is this trust of the system. Fern doesn't really think I don't think Fern really necessarily trusts grown-ups the whole time through the show, but she has this idea that there's kind of a safety bubble around them because they're kids. And grown-ups are never going to go that far in threatening to harm children, no matter what. Spoilers for this episode for you, Fern. They absolutely would. And Jod is absolutely that person. And I love that that's her reaction to this as part of it is she couldn't have even conceived of the idea that an adult would directly threaten her like this.
Right, because, like, I mean, this gets back to the artificial, like, safety bubble of the suburbs that Fern, like, went on at end. Fern is the rebellious one. But outside in the galaxy, she's just another suburban kid. She's just another spoiled kid. And that moment is like the harsh reality of like Jod's worldview taking over the group dynamic. And you can see it the when he realizes that SM-33 can fill the pool with acid because Jod is perfectly fine. Oh, if I dissolve all my old pirate buddies, no sweat off my back, actually makes my life easier. That he just he not only is comfortable threatening all those lives, he is actively like, this is a great thing for me. And then you can see in his face, because Jude Law, I think, kills it in the series, just when he just like, he knows that if that is where he is with violence right now, that it's time to pull off the mask and stop playing around and seize control of the situation. And yeah, like you get, like, I think about how the kids act in the pirate lair. Neil sets off all the traps. He's way too trusting. He's the guy who's going to get tricked and swindled. So he sets off all the traps. Fern, the rebel, isn't actually that rebellious in the context of the wider galaxy. She isn't actually powerful in any way. You know, Wim has all these fantasies of being a hero, but he doesn't even know how to hold a lightsaber correctly. You know, he thinks he's building up to a hero moment. And so none of them have what it takes to really survive against people like Jod, who are just manipulative assholes. And it's a good downer moment for the kids, especially after they have felt so much unity together. And like, you know, this goes into how those kids are going to interact together in the next episode and breaking all that back down. But just like, again, just really effective storytelling from the beginning of this episode to the end and weaving all the themes into all the character moments together. And it's great. This show's great.
And knowing with the benefit too of having watched episode 8, we know that a thing with Jod is he doesn't necessarily like he tells himself at least he doesn't want to hurt anyone. He doesn't want to do this. He says over and over in the finale, I don't want to hurt anyone. I want you all to go back to work. I want you all to make money for me.
Yeah.
But he says this, but at the same time, he is perfectly willing to hurt people if it's a good idea. And so I I love that we're seeing this here, and particularly with his turn, because he also hesitates for a really long time before he turns on the kids. But he knows from the beginning, he's like, I'm going to do this. And also, he tells 33, like, he doesn't tell 33 to kill the kids. He tells them to take the kids prisoner.
Take them
prisoner. He's still going to get them home.
Like, and he like challenges Fern according to the pirate code, and then immediately tells her, just say you yield and I won't have to hurt you. It's not that he's unwilling. Like, he is willing to give them an out. And that's like the nicest thing you can say about Jod's behavior at this moment, is that some part of him understands that these are children, and if he can enact his plans without hurting them, that is preferable than having to hurt them. But, if he has to, he will kill them.
My final note on this section is, I just want to echo Bradley's sentiments all the way from the top of the episode. The whim moment where he pulled out the lightsaber, and you can tell, if you know anything, this is the nerdiest fucking sentence I'm going to say on this already extremely nerdy podcast. If you know anything about lightsaber emitters, you immediately clock he's holding it upside down. Still a 10 out of 10 moment where he holds it upside down.
And like, it's really effective. Like, you have, I wrote down, the Jod literally says, careful, Whim, it's not one of your stories. This is like, I'm the one who's telling you how the world works right now, that this is not going to go the way you think. But the heroic music still swells. And like, there's a little bit of caution in Jod's voice, because the lightsaber is actually very dangerous. And he is still just made out of meat and bones. He would actually be injured by a lightsaber if Whim actually swung it at him. And like, and like, the music swells and the shots line up to give Whim this big hero moment, and then it just falters, and that's great. Because like, Whim's strength isn't being the big hero. He's a clever little tricksy bastard, which is why he's like, oh wait, we're all standing up in front of the trap. We can escape if I activate the trap and send us who knows where. That's Whim's strength as a character. It's not being the big hero, at least not yet. He will get there. Sort of. I like the ending of the show a lot, but we're not talking about that yet. And
no, we're gonna have to do the end of the show by ourselves, because I'm just gonna have too many thoughts. We would have a 4-hour whoever would be the theoretical guest on that episode would be sitting here for 4 hours, right. And
we couldn't do it.
I don't have that kind of time. All right, Bradley, I remembered this week. Tell us who wrote and directed this episode, because I checked. The writer is not who has been writing most of the episodes.
So this is the first time it's changed since the beginning of the show, where it was the creators of the show that were writing it. So I'll start with the writer, because it's kind of interesting. So Myung John Westner is known.
Joe Westner.
Joe, I'm sorry, it autocorrected. Joe Westner is known obviously for Skeleton Crew. Also wrote some episodes of High Potential, a new show, and Death and Other Details also this year. So their writing credits have all come out in 2024. So I thought that was very interesting. She's been writing for a minute, but this is like her kind of time to shine, I guess. All of her shows kind of all came out at once. So good for her. And then
please hire her for more things, entertainment industry. She wrote a very good episode.
Very good episode. Yeah, I have to say, so far, I would argue this is my favorite of the show. So she's actually doing
interesting.
A pretty good job. Directed this week is Jake Shearer. I think that's how you say it. He's mostly a music video. Schreier?
I don't know.
He's mostly a music video director, kind of like the ones that we had last week. And he's done film as well. He's worked with celebrities such as Justin Bieber, Kanye West, Selena Gomez, etc. He's done a lot of music videos. But his film debut was a movie called Robot and Frank in 2012. And he is currently slated to direct the upcoming Marvel film Thunderbolts, which comes out, I think, later this year.
He's one away. He's one away. If he does a Disney movie,
Disney film,
he'll get we call it the Disney trifecta. Normally for actors, in which you have appeared in a Star Wars property, a Marvel property, and a mainline Disney property. That is the Disney trifecta. He's close. He's close to getting it as a director. I don't know if we've had anybody get it as a director.
Anyway,
we have to get back on track.
Yes.
Loreley, normally we would ask final thoughts on this episode. In honor of the Vorthos Cast, I am going to change that up and say if you want to do final thoughts in the Vorthos Cast style, you are more than welcome to do that.
For folks that don't listen to the Vorthos Cast, we also do a final thoughts section. Our final thoughts are not about magic. It's specifically final thoughts about something that has nothing to do with the episode, just kind of as a little personal moment.
Okay.
So if that's what we're going to do here.
You know
Final
what?
thoughts.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
We'll just have to
Bradley,
make
I'm
it
putting you
quick
on the
so it's
spot.
not going too far.
Let's do
but
final
yeah.
thoughts in the Vorthos Cast style of something completely
Sure.
fucking unrelated to what we just talked about.
So I've been playing Pentiment finally. Recently, I am in the middle-ish of Act 2. Game is incredible. So many people talked about it when it came out. It's kind of a point-and-click adventure, mystery, RPG, visual novel type thing, all done in like illuminated manuscript style, set in the 16th century Europe.
Oh, I'd play the shit out of this.
Involving you play as a character named Andreas Mahler, who's an artist, a monastery. None of this sounds like a compelling game for cool hip young people. It's extremely good, and it's like I can't explain why it's so good because spoilers. Just like go into it expecting like a really fulfilling and rewarding narrative RPG, point and click adventure type experience, and it's really satisfying. I'm really enjoying it. The characters in the game are phenomenal. It's a game that really shouts its themes in really strong, exaggerated ways. So it's like very clear what this game is about and what it wants to explore, which is all happening in a town in southern Germany in the 16th century with peasants and monks and nuns and landowners and nobility, and it's just great. A lot of its themes are really resonant with today. I'm having a blast. Highly recommend to people who like narrative games. Just top quality.
My final thought, completely unrelated to the episode. So Bradley encouraged me after the god-awful piece of shit that was Elite Season 6. He was like, you cannot go straight into Season 7. You have to watch something good or you will lose all faith in humanity. So over the course of about the last week, I have watched finally all of Trigun Stampede.
Hell yeah!
Because my friend Claudia has been bullying me for like 8 months to consume all of Trigun. So I watched Trigun 98, then I read the manga, and then I went into Stampede. First of all, Stampede is one of the visually best anime shows I've seen ever at all. Like, it's fucking incredible.
It's
Number
like
two,
the standard for 3D animation.
Oh, yeah.
Anime.
I couldn't believe it was 3D at points.
Yeah,
I was like,
no, it's great. I
I
think it looks phenomenal.
I need to write entire dissertations on Trigun Stampede as an adaptation, because having read the source material before I go into it and going, this is fucking like I watched 98 and it was 80% fine. I hated the ending. I thought it Game of Thrones did. Then I read the manga and I was like, this is fine. It's a little weird, but okay. I watched Stampede and I was like, no, I fucking get it now. I understand. If you're into anime, if you like my boyfriend listens to our original Visions episode and got really fucking mad at us, if you're that type of person, Trigun Stampede. If you have not watched it, I beg of you, please watch it. It's only 12 episodes. You can knock it out in a Saturday.
I haven't read the manga, but I love the original anime, and Stampede does make it. It's a show where you can tell that everyone involved in making it made a lot of really big swingy choices that were probably not popular in the rooms they were made in, and they all work. It's so fascinating to me. Yeah, great. Oh, that makes me happy to hear that you enjoyed it.
I loved it. I told Claudia like my reaction to finishing the finale. I'll say this and then we'll let Bradley do his. My reaction to finishing the finale was I want that all scrubbed from my brain so I can go back and watch it again for the first time.
It's great.
Bradley, do you have a final thought that's completely unrelated to Skeleton Crew?
Completely unrelated to Skeleton Crew. My final thought. I was gonna do one where I was like, I saw the trailer for How to Train Your Dragon live action, and I was like, why are they making this film if it's just a shot-for-shot remake of the exact animation? Like, it makes no sense to me. I understand if it's a remake, not a remaster. If it's a remaster, what the fuck's the point other than just to spend money?
Hope this helps.
Yeah, money. So that's not my real final thought. I don't understand why that's happening. But my real final thought I'll mix in with our pluggables because I have a new thing to promote.
Thank fucking God.
So just so I
God.
can talk about it for more than 3 seconds. So there you go. So normally when we do my pluggables on the show, we talk about, you can go watch all the shows that I've done or worked on in the past. Last year, I did work on Temptation Island again. So it is coming back.
We can finally talk about this.
Yes, I can finally say Temptation Island is coming back. It was bought by Netflix, so now it is going to be on Netflix versus USA Network. So it is a new season of Temptation Island launches on Netflix March 12th. So it's coming up pretty soon. So there you go.
I hate when you film Temptation Island. if you're a regular listener of this podcast and I sound really stressed about the scheduling, there's a good chance Bradley is now filming Temptation Island, because what happens is we switch time zones. Bradley's in Atlanta.
So bad.
I'm in Los Angeles. Bradley and I normally were used to him being 3 hours ahead of me. So I'll record in the early morning and go about my day. And Bradley's recording in the afternoon. At that point, when he's filming Temptation Island, we have to switch because he's 3 hours behind me.
Right. And I can only record at night. So it's like...
Yep. And sometimes there's a fucking luau happening literally right outside your window. Every night we try to record or season 1.
Yeah.
It's so fucking frustrating.
I both hope and don't hope that it's happening for or season 2.
Yes. We would like Bradley to keep getting paid and employed because that's the money he uses to make this show for now. But also it's such a pain in the ass when he's doing Temptation Island.
So there you go. So that's my new pluggable moving forward. Is that?
There's a element of the Skeleton Crew episode that we just watched in which the kids in Jod use a single Old Republic credit in order to access vast riches. And hey, Loreley, if other people want to give a single Republic credit to access vast riches, where can they find a method to do that? And can you tell that I thought of this like 3 days ago and have been sitting on it?
Oh, that's because you listen to the Vorthos Cast and you listen to Chris try to set up segues for me constantly, and then me not realizing it, and it gets really messy and complicated, and we joke about it a lot.
See, Chris, this is how you do it.
This is exactly. Credits are actually no good here.
You do need something more real.
Yeah. Chance cubes, unfortunately, also don't help you. Dollars, though, are great. US dollars, or I guess, anyway, so I'm just gonna skip all the bullshit. The Vorthos Cast. So if you want to listen to the Vorthos Cast and learn about Magic the Gathering story and lore and all that fun stuff, we are on SoundCloud. We are also on like Spotify and iTunes, and anywhere you can find podcasts, you can find us. And if you can't find us somewhere where you get your podcast, let us know and we can get there, because setting up podcasts on platforms is easy. And if you like our show and want to support us, we do have Patreon. That's patreon.com/the Vorthos Cast, which is what I was being set up for. We have everyone who supports us on Patreon gets access to our Discord. So God, this is so rehearsed in my brain. I'm like literally slipping exactly to the way I do it on my show. I can't even think of other. Everyone who supports us on Patreon gets access to our Discord community where Vorthoses from around the world are. And then this is where I stumble because I have to change it every week.
Are discovering the vast riches of pirate lairs in their various channels in the Discord, or possibly even talking about the new Star Wars things.
We do have we talk about non-magic things on our podcast Discord too. We do have a very lively movies and television channels. We do love talking about Star Wars. There are a lot of Star Wars fans. Unsurprisingly, there's a lot of overlap in nerd communities.
Shocking.
Yeah, shocking. So I just got distracted myself thinking about how Wizards of the Coast did actually have the Star Wars card game in whatever years those were. It was a while ago.
I actually vaguely remember this.
Fantasy Flight, I think, did the more recent one, but which I know people enjoyed. But yeah.
You can find Bradley on, as previously mentioned, a whole fucking host of reality TV shows in which he has worked on the production of, including such shows as Married to Medicine, Queen's Court, The Circle on Netflix, and Temptation Island, now also on Netflix. Please watch these shows if you like reality television. It keeps Bradley employed and able to make this show. You can find me on an absolutely fuck-ass load of things for no fucking reason. I don't know why I keep doing this to myself. You can find me on the Star Wars TTRPG podcast, For Light and Dice, a TTRPG actual play podcast set in Star Wars' High Republic era. You can also find a bunch of books that I write. I write gay thriller mystery novels, and you can find out information about that by going to my social media. It's at CWRoger6. I talk about all of them over there. You can also find me involved with Legends Expo, a fan-run Star Wars Legends celebratory convention happening in Burbank this year, September, I think, 13th and 14th. you can go to legends-expo.com and get more info about that or purchase your tickets. You wouldn't know that from all of that, but I'm actually pretty bad at remembering to do all of our pluggables correctly.
Yeah, I thought about, maybe after this Skeleton Crew coverage is over, we'll like write a script that we each read so that we can just say the same thing every single time. The problem is we keep changing
it, Bradley.
I know,
the problem is I keep adding things. You keep doing new shows, and I keep jumping on more fucking projects because I am who I am and I can't stop.
I'm gonna write a script for at least just me, and I'm gonna have like the last 3 shows I worked on, and that's it. And then like that, I'll just continuously plug those 3 until I get a new show in, and then it's just like that's all it'll ever be.
But Bradley, it's so fun to say. It's so fun to say Queen's Court, Married to Medicine, The Circle on Netflix, and Temptation Island now on Netflix. It makes me feel like important.
I'm sure it does.
Anyway, Loreley, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a ton of fun to talk about this episode of Skeleton Crew. And if people like Magic the Gathering, they should definitely check out the Vorthos Cast.
Yeah, thanks again for having me on. This was a blast. I had a great time.
And Bradley, on the subject of pre-recorded script sections that we're not doing every fucking time, please run our socials. Thank you for listening to Gold Squadron Gaze. Did Charles fuck something up? Email us at goldsquadrongaze@gmail.com and let us know. You can follow us on BlueSky, Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at Gold Squadron Gaze. Subscribe to us on YouTube at Gold Squadron Gaze, where we post full episodes of this podcast. If you like the podcast, you can also rate us and review us on your favorite podcast app of choice. Please join us next week and every week for another episode of Gold Squadron Gaze. I want to make friends, but I'm a big giant tentacle monster, and so anytime ships come near me, I just inevitably end up destroying them because I'm a big giant tentacle monster, so I'm really lonely.